Today we have Desire, a returning guest from our last podcast. Yes, NDIS Celebrities and Cowboys. And we also have our lovely Christine from UC Compliance. Christine, would you like to talk a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to the podcast today. So a little bit about myself. So I am based in Brisbane. I run an organization called UC Compliance. And UC Compliance was really created out of the passion of wanting to provide really quality consultation services to support the health and human services sector. So my policy background, I have worked for over 2 decades in government in New Zealand and in Queensland. And I actually got into the health and human services by complete accident. I was working in the I was working for the RTA at the time, doing policy work for the RTA, and I was at a workshop, and one of the directors at the Department of Communities said to me, "Hey, listen, I think you'd be very interested in doing, human services policy work. There's opportunities coming up in our department. Consider applying." And so I did. I went through the interview process, and I segued into health and human services, and so that's how I started my journey around that. I have a master's in public policy from Victoria University in Wellington. So I love compliance, basically. So the rest of the world that comes into contact with me doesn't have to. But I've done a whole range of things in the compliance space, in the health and human services space, ranging from domestic and family violence, homelessness, disability, all of that within Queensland.
Awesome. Thank you for the introduction. Great to have you today. Today, obviously, the topic for today is compliance. No points for guessing. So we'll jump straight into it. So the first thing here that I want to sort of discuss is the current market trends in the NDIS compliance space. There are quite a fair bit of changes that happened recently, and there are going to be a fair bit more changes coming.
Mm-hmm.
So, Christine, do you want to share a little bit more about what has been happening within the space?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess how has these changes affected the providers and the participants?
Okay. So a lot of the changes that are happening now have been signaled by government for quite some time. So the bill that came into effect as, I guess, the legislation on the 3rd of October was kind of the first concrete piece of thing that the government issued and has actually put into effect. The challenges with a lot of the reform landscape is there's been a lot of information, right? There's been a lot of consultation. If you look at, way back when government started the whole inquiry into the process of how should you change NDIS, because the budget itself was blowing out. There were things that because of the framework under which NDIS was, which was choice and control, sitting down and, having a conversation around what is appropriate for a participant. There were so many things that were not kind of concrete in terms of definition. So there was intent around what supports should look like, but there was a lot of wriggle room in terms of the interpretation around that. And that caused a lot of angst for providers. There was also the withdrawal of state governments from all disability programs. Now, that was not anticipated when NDIS was introduced. I think before we got on air, we were having a chat about, NDIS being an insurance scheme and an insurer of last resort. So a lot of the reforms that you're seeing coming through now, and that's why it's called Getting the NDIS Back on Track, is really to, ask the question, what should an insurance scheme, and remember, it is not a grant, it is not a procurement, it's an insurance scheme.
Really
what
important.
should people actually with a disability be receiving under the insurance scheme, and what should be funded elsewhere? So if you've had a look at the consultation papers, right, and the first thing around the definition of a support, so you all saw that, right, the categories, the list. But if you actually looked at it, those were things that you were supposed to be doing anyway.
From the get-go,
Right,
yes.
from the get-go. And the things that were in the 15 categories of things that were definitely not, those were things that were never really funded anyway. It just really clarified that position. So all it did was, it didn't really introduce anything new. It just kind of clarified it. So people were like, oh, we've got a list. And it's like, hang on, have you actually read the list? And have you actually looked at it? These are things that you should have been actually doing anyway. So things like that were in the gray were people have set up, life coaching businesses. People had dance schools. People had all sorts of other things which were useful to the sector. And don't get me wrong, just because something has been said, the NDIS is not funding it, right? And I think this is where some of the confusion was, does not mean that it's not important and it's not valued for a participant. All that it means is that the insurance scheme is not who should be paying for it. Now, all of us have insurances, right?
Yes.
We all have shortfalls on our policies, right? We know
Absolutely.
that our policy will pay up to here, right? It won't pay up to there. Even when you go into hospital, does that mean that your hospital stay is not valid? No. But you know that it's a contribution model. And that's what NDIS is, right? Whereas people, I think, got into the mindset that NDIS was 100%, and as long as I have a disability, as long as I've been assessed eligible, everything should be getting paid for.
Yes.
And so that sentiment, I guess, is what has gone through the reforms that you're seeing. So on the 3rd of October, we got a new piece of legislation that's come in. A lot of the other stuff that actually makes that legislation work, as in the rules, as in the practice standards, as in the introduction of, mandatory registration, a lot of that you will notice on the reform map. And there's a very simple regulatory reform map. And if people haven't looked at it, I encourage them to go. It's on the NDIS. Just simply Google NDIS reform roadmap. It's a very simple one-pager. And it has got a flow diagram there of where the reforms are and the different consultation. Now, why is there consultation? Why is the government doing this? They clearly don't have all the answers, right? And they want to take participants on the journey. And there's also unintended consequences, right? So, for example, from the 1st of January, new participants entering the scheme will receive what's called an impairment notice, right? And so with the introduction of an impairment notice, it's now, again, it's the term, it's the way it's been framed. Now it's saying the participant should only be receiving supports that are related to their disability. Right?
Yes.
So all of the things, so there's a lot of things that participants want to do that are related to a lifestyle, that are related to a preference, right? Those are great. I do too. I want those things too. But the insurance scheme is not paying for that. So the insurance scheme is paying for what's related to the impairment, right? So providers are going to have to start getting their heads around these impairment notices, right? As they start to come out. So there's a 2-year transition frame for those impairment notices and those impairment notices to kick in. Providers now, there is a consultation. So the first part of the bill was really dealing with, I guess, stripping away for participants and really defining how their funding is going to change, right? What is in and what is out. And it also stripped away what is going to other agencies. So if you look at the funding, there are things like rental, for example, right? All of that should have been coming from Centrelink anyway through the disability pension. And for the most part, it is, right? But there were a few loopholes. So government was tightening some of that. There was allied health services that should be funded through the medical system. That's a state government responsibility, not a federal government responsibility. So government is tightening on that. There's the education and all sorts. So if you go through all of those different things, that's coming through, right? So that was what a lot of what the first part of the bill was focusing on. The second part of the bill is now focusing on providers, right? And so providers, you need to be really interested. Now, we don't yet have the bill. We had a consultation paper, which we all rushed to and read, and we're like, oh, okay, need more information. The biggest thing that from a provider's perspective that's, I guess, scaring the industry a little bit is around the fraud, right? And so from a government perspective, and the fraud, look, there's fraud in every system, right? Every single system out there has got some level of fraud in
Absolutely.
it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because somebody will find a loophole somewhere. So it's government's looking at how do they tighten as much of those loopholes as possible, right? So there's been a lot of learnings in the 15 odd years that NDIS has been in place. So now they're looking at tightening it. And there've been a lot of high profile cases. I mean, we all watch Four Corners. We've all read and we've all seen, right? So in terms of fraud being one of the biggest drivers, and remember the bill is called Getting the NDIS Back on Track, right? Providers looking at locking down any loopholes that providers may have for mischarging for mischarging participants is one theme that's really coming through. So providers now, and it's actually in effect now, if you charge a participant and you get paid out for something that should not be funded, right? The NDIS can come back to you and claim that money. That money becomes a debt if that gets proved from a compliance perspective, right?
Yes.
So some of those things are things that providers need to really start paying attention to, right? Some of the enforcement actions in terms of, every other day, the NDIS kind of sends out, a barrage of letters on a Friday, right? Saying, a whole lot of people are non-compliant or, we rejected these based on this. And you'll see some activities on LinkedIn about all sorts of different things. And that's because they've now got compliance officers. So it's not like the NDIS has gotten really new powers. They're now actually enforcing a lot of the existing powers. And originally, they didn't have the mandate for that. So as a provider, what I would be watching is not so much from a government perspective, what is going necessarily to participants, but what is going to the agency and what is going to the agency for what. Because in order for the agency to get the NDIS back on track, they need more foot soldiers. That's more money. So the agency is expanding, right? And so you need to look at the areas that it's expanding in. So now you've got NDIS provider liaison officers, right? You didn't have those before. And these are officers that are going to be liaising with providers to try and build a stronger partnership almost, or a stronger relationship between the NDIS Commission and who is the policing body for providers, right? And the actual provider market itself. I don't know how many of you have tried to phone the NDIS to get information.
I've tried multiple times.
So I love my colleagues at I've done some workshops with both the NDIA and the NDIS Commission in Melbourne, where we were talking about, just the lack of connectivity sometimes between the agency and the commission. So, the agency, the commission, and providers both play very different roles. And so if you ask the average provider, what does the agency do and what does the commission do? A lot of people don't realize that the commission is an agency within the NDIA, and the NDIA is where the minister sits and where the money comes from, and they're responsible for participants. The commission is responsible for, for enforcement. It's responsible for complaints. It's responsible for different things. And a lot of people, government's complex. So a lot of your average person isn't looking at that and isn't really understanding all of that. So I guess as the reforms are being rolled out, one of the things that I say to people is go to your single point of truth. People don't also understand that the National Disability Insurance Agency sits within the Department of Social Services. It sits within a bigger department, right? It's not a department on its own. It's an agency within a department. There is also a broader agenda around disability reforms in general, right? And so you need to also understand how the broader disability reforms are going to actually impact you. And then before the current government came into place in Queensland, there were reforms around restrictive practices in Queensland, for example, right? So there's state-based reforms that are happening. So there's a lot of moving parts. And so the compliance landscape then starts to get murky and complicated for your average provider who isn't spending all of that time.
And I guess, for the biggest one that, is the most contested at the moment, the one that really impacts providers, I suppose, is the tiered registration or the mandatory registration.
The mandatory registration,
So I guess that really affects the landscape, right? And, everyone is discussing about how it would impact them. Everyone is a bit unclear of how it would impact them. And I guess from my perspective as a registered provider myself, I feel like it's something that is necessary.
100%.
But I do feel like, providers have to be better informed, whether they're registered or non-registered, about how this would look like, right? So, for me, personally, I believe there's consultancy going on between the providers and the government.
Yes,
obviously,
there is.
we've not been extended that invite.
Yeah.
But I feel like there needs to be a little bit more transparency right now, because there's a lot of misinformation going around. And, you holding back the information until, 6 months later, once everything is all decided, doesn't really help the situation now, because you would see that there's a lot of providers leaving the space because of the uncertainty that's actually happening right now.
There's actually a lot of information. Go, Design.
No, I think one of the biggest reforms that I'm interested in, or that I welcome, is the mandatory registration for unregistered providers. And I guess my biggest question, and you partly answered this, was why was this not in place from the onset? It's a scheme, it's a sector, and NDIS is one of those sectors that it felt like a cowboy space. Anyone free for all, just come. If you're in agriculture, whatever, just come get a piece of the cake and all of that. It was really messy, and it's good that we're beginning to see these reforms kick in, but it took a while. And if we really care about the participants, why was safety of the participants not really ensured and taken care of from the onset? I know there's a design input, but I think it was a little bit too late. And it's a welcome development regardless, because the challenge I used to see was this doesn't make sense to me, because I'm very simple in my thought. Like, there was a lot of scrutiny on registered providers, but the unregistered provider has no scrutiny. They hid under these things and did a lot of things, but obviously, in the same breath, with the rise of compliance as well, the rise of cost of compliance as well, it's I feel like there also needs to be something to be done for new providers who don't have that level of financial power to actually get registered and all of that. But look, I think one of the reforms that I still applaud the NDIS for is this mandatory registration, so that every player and you can actually pull them up or even help them, give them some educationals to improve the scheme.
Now, is there a time frame for that?
So,
good question.
Okay, so if I just answer a couple of questions, so let's answer the time frame question, right? Yep. So 16th of September, that's when the announcement was made, right, regarding mandatory registration, right?
Talking about September 2024?
2024, last year. We're in. Okay, so September 2024. So the minister made that announcement, right? And so, again, this is what I was saying, that there's a lot of information that gets put out, but the devil's in the detail, right? And I'll come back to your answer as to why. It was set up initially with the unregistered and the registered. So I'll come back to that. But I do want to answer about the time frame.
But before that, I just want to quickly add as well, I do agree that there are information out there. And obviously devil's in the details and things like that. But what I find with providers is that we always hear information from another provider. It's always from someone else.
That's
right?
the problem.
and this is the thing, why are we not hearing from the NDIS direct? There's information there without you actually having to dig into it, where the communication, the delivery of communication from the NDI, it's just not there.
And I have to agree, right? I am a person, so I've got like a 40-page PowerPoint presentation that I did on, honestly, I did this last year on the reforms, and I'm happy to share it with the community at some point. And basically we were asking that question, right? Because people were ringing us and saying, okay, well, you people spending time on this, what does this actually mean? And we're sitting there and we're like, we're not actually sure. So, and so we spent a lot of time, and I spent with, legal minds, people who were, we had our philosophical discussion on the change of the premise of the act. But when it comes to exactly what you're asking, which is, okay, I'm a provider. What is the information that I need to know, right? There isn't a paucity of information in terms of quantum. There's a paucity of information in terms of quality, right? In terms of it actually precisely answering the questions that you want. And part of that is because the the answers that you want are not yet available.
Yeah.
So that's why people are struggling with finding them, right? So if we go to the reform map, and I'm reading this off the Commission's website. This is not me making stuff up, right? So these are the timelines that they have got, right? Consultation and having your say around platform providers, right? First of all, you've got to understand what a platform provider is,
Yes.
right? So the terminology that they're using needs to be simplified. But if you want to understand what a platform provider is, on their page, there is actually a leaflet on what that is. But that requires you to go and read it and actually understand. And even in there, you'll see in the consultation, they are consulting on that definition of a platform provider. So they don't even have that. Right? And that consultation is open, but try getting into those consultations. They're fully booked most of the time. So by the time you become aware of it, you can't even get onto it because they haven't put enough on because they don't have enough foot soldiers. That's closing on the 7th of March. So you can still jump onto that. That's 7th of March, 2025, about platform providers.
Yes.
There's a consultation paper. The next consultation forum is with industry partners, right? Around that, again, that's invited. And as you said, you weren't necessarily invited to the industry partners. So when policy is being made, right, if I just use my policy background just to explain a little bit, we talk to different sectors, right? Because
Yes.
we talk to different industry stakeholders. So the minister, when he is making a decision, wants to know, I am making this decision. Who have you spoken to? Who is supporting? Who is it going to impact? How much is it going to cost government? And how effective, where has it worked? So there's a series of things that you have to tick off. To answer those questions, you have to talk to the market because some of these things don't exist,
Correct.
right? So I used to say to people, I'm a policy person, I make stuff up. And the reason why I say I make stuff up loosely is because some of the stuff that you're asking doesn't exist at the moment,
Yes.
right? A formal enshrined definition of platform partners doesn't exist in the way that you need it to exist for it to be effective, right?
Yes.
So they need to come and talk to you and get your ideas. Then we talk to a participant, get their ideas. All of that takes time.
Yep.
Right?
And I guess for me, it's like also the people that they consult with, are they representative of the general populace
The
as
people
well?
they consult with are the people who turn up.
And that's
And
also a
that
problem.
is not the government's fault.
Yep.
Right? That is a fault of the system of the whole
The
consultation.
whole consultation. So garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. So if you are really passionate about
Yep.
this stuff, then get involved. It is
Yeah.
tedious. It
Yep.
is time consuming. It requires you doing research, right?
Yep.
It requires you, nobody's going to come to you and say, here it is.
Yep.
It's on, like if you go on DSS,
Yep.
right? They have a have your say page,
Yes.
right? And that is a page that is dedicated to the consultation processes around the reforms. I live on there because I'm interested, right?
Yes.
And I find it tedious, right? And
Yep.
sometimes I forget to look and I'll be like, oh my gosh, 2 days, I nearly missed that consultation. So
Yes.
and there's also so many consultations that are going on, right?
There's poor awareness to that. No education. Like, look, apart from the generic newsletters, right? The pitfall of NDIS design from a provider's perspective is that there's a lot of disparity from the provider's perspective that we don't get a lot of support from the NDIS. It's way polarized and it's way on the other side of the equation, which is all for the participants. I think there has to be a level playing field where the providers are also seen as equal playing partners in this whole game.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the lack of I think if every provider should be getting a letter.
Exactly.
You have been invited to this.
Yes.
Then it's now left for the providers to opt in or opt out.
Opt out.
Yeah.
Because it's there's a whole lot of things that I feel that is shoved on through us without proper representation. And you're right, not the average provider would live on these places. You have to be an NDIS geek like yourself
Yeah.
or policy geek like yourself to actually.
And
what you're sharing is actually news.
Average
A lot
provider.
a lot of people don't even
I'm
know.
just on NDIS Commission's website,
So
right?
how many people operationally
So-
have the operational time to
actually
actually
That's
go-
what
to
I wanted to
go
say.
and look at this? Is we are time
Exactly.
poor.
So
We're in the human services industry. We're caring for people. We're out there doing the hard yakka.
Yeah.
You need to actually extend the hand of fellowship to say, hey, come in here. There's something. Now you need to make it easy. So sometimes, and this is me, maybe my mind, I'm asking myself, do we actually want it to be, do they actually want to consult us? You know,
Right.
Yeah.
because
So how-
it's
So
yeah,
Desire, on that point, do they want to consult you? It's a very valid point that you're making. But your pain is the same for business. It's the same across any sector that government regulates. And I'll tell you where the challenge is, right? NDIS, who are your peak bodies, right? Who is, that's the role that you're talking about. That's the role of a peak body, right?
Mm-hmm.
So government cannot talk to every single person. That is just
True.
not possible, right?
Yes.
100%.
So there are peak bodies. So then what I think the providers are identifying is who is effective, right? That is representative of provide. Because remember when NDIS started, there wasn't a market, right? The market
Yeah.
had to be created.
Mm,
So
yes.
hence why I said I wanted to come back to answer your question about registered and unregistered provider. But before I did that, I did want to finish these dates because they're quite critical. So 20 February 2025, platform provider definition, that's closing, right? So that's Thursday. 27th of March 2025, obligations of platform providers should be known at that point in time. So between February and March, they're going to go away, take away what you've said, and come back and say this. This is the obligations of platform providers. 24th of April 2025, they will start implementation of mandatory registration. We do not know what that looks like right now.
Yes.
And so those questions that are being asked now, there's chicken and egg situations, and that's part of the platform. Part of the problem and the challenge is that there are certain things that we just do not know. And the things that are going to impact your business, a lot of it we do not know. And that is the honest truth. What we do know is that mandatory registration, nothing, according to the NDIS Commission's website, will be implemented before 1 July 2025, right? We are in February, right? July is not that far.
Yes.
I need to know what I need to put in my system. Don't drop a bomb on me on 30 June, right? And expect me to be up and running on 1 July,
Yes.
right? There are some signals of some things that you need to do, right? If you are a supported independent living provider, all my clients that are supported independent living providers are registered now,
Yes.
right? And I've been working with them for a while because we've known the writing has been on the wall,
Yes.
right? This is coming,
Yes.
right? Start getting yourself registered.
Yep.
If you're a support coordinator and you're doing support coordination within your service provision business, we all know that that is a massive conflict of interest.
Yes.
And you should never have been doing that in the first place.
Yep.
The system was not designed for that, right?
Yes.
Support coordinators, plan managers are intermediaries. And that is where they were meant to be. Support coordination was also not designed to be a permanent part of the system. So when they announced that they are looking at reviewing, that wasn't new. But for a lot of people, it was news,
Yes.
right? And so looking at the whole support coordination and plan managers, because sometimes there isn't even clarity around where the plan manager's role starts and where the support coordinators end, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And sometimes you go to them for things that
Yeah.
they are responsible for, but providers come back and say they're not, getting the information that they want. So in terms of support for providers, I think one of the things providers are going to have to do is actually come together themselves and actually start creating these bodies that can actually go and lobby, because there's power in a collective,
Yes.
right? There is power in a collective going and saying, hey, I have got 10,000 providers that are part of our association. They pay us our membership. This is what we represent. These are the things that we want from government, right? Those are things systems that the industry, government's not going to do that for the industry.
Yeah.
The industry needs to do that for itself. Government also has a finite set of resources. And I will put my public policy hat on and I will say, you are not the priority, the participant is. That is not going to change.
Yep.
It is not. And there's an expectation that providers, and this is government's thing, you are being given a lot of money.
Back
Don't
to
get me
defer.
wrong. I know exactly your overheads. I know all of that. I've got my public service hat on, right? There is an expectation that you are going to get the resources that you need because you're being paid a lot of money, right? We need to take care of
I
vulnerable
love the
people.
word expectation.
Yes, that is the expectation. So hence desires frustration,
Yep.
right? Which I hear from every single provider.
Yes.
But waiting for government to provide you with that solution, that conversation is never going to.
But the funny thing is that, I received an email today from the Department of Disability Services.
Yeah.
That they're going to form a council
Mhm.
of providers that they can actually
Yep.
consult with. I'm like, why didn't the NDIS do this?
So that's why I said
what
government's
she
got
said.
a finite set of resources,
Yeah.
right? And so within
The
those
focus
resources,
is different.
they have to have different focuses.
Yep.
And now, if you also notice one of the reforms, which we didn't talk about,
Yes.
is the Commonwealth is giving back
Back part of the
responsibilities to states.
Yes.
So
Foundation
states,
supports. Yeah.
states said when NDIS came, thank you, Commonwealth, we're out of this business,
Yes.
right? And then Commonwealth saying, come back.
Yeah.
So what you need to now be watching is what is your state government
Legislation.
doing,
Yeah.
That
right?
adds a lot of
And
level
that
of complexity.
Changes. It does.
So it just muddies the whole thing up. Because there's a whole lot
Different
of
set of legislations
But
But
anyway.
it doesn't muddy the water up because we've got two-tiered systems of government, right?
Yeah.
And okay, let me talk about homelessness, housing, for example, right?
Yep.
So the department, so whichever department of housing that you have in, right? Federal funding comes in for housing, right?
Yes.
Remember, Australia doesn't have a two-tax system. All the money's coming from federal government, right?
Yeah.
All of it, if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
You do not have state taxes like the US,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
We have one tax system. It goes into one pot, right?
Yes.
And the way that it's divided up in state government, if you think about it, your GST revenue, all of that, that's divided. There's formulas in the ATO that then define what budget is then managed at a state level, right?
Mhm.
And states have responsibilities. And the reasons for having different tiers of government is because of the proximity, right, that you have to your population group that is being
Mhm.
impacted, right? So, if you've got a federal system, right, like you have in New Zealand, where the country is making one system, that works, right? If you
Mhm.
had a federal system here, which we do not have, right?
Mm.
The state autonomy goes away. And there's a lot of efficiencies to be made from that,
Mhm.
by the way, because you've got to replicate the bureaucracy, right? At all
Yes.
levels. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of cost that's associated with that. So I do take that on board. But every single sector has the same level of complexity in that there is a federal government responsibility, there's a state government responsibility. The onus now is going to be on clarity, right?
Mm.
Around the roles and responsibilities, right? There wasn't that clarity.
Yep.
When NDIS came into effect, right? The
Mhm.
Commonwealth said this, and all of a sudden you had access to a pool of money,
Yep.
right? Probably a little bit easier than state. So everybody was like, yeah, we're going there. And the states were like, yeah, we're out of this business. So now if state government's coming back into it, rather than looking at the complexity from a provider's perspective, I'm looking at what is the opportunity, right?
Mm.
Because you have greater access to your state government than you do to your federal government, right?
Mhm.
And so and you also understand your backyard better than you do somebody else's backyard, right?
Mhm.
So look at child safety, for example.
Yes.
They're all doing the same thing, right?
Yes.
But the way Queensland plays in that safety space, you will understand it more because you can walk into your child safety officer, you go home, you live in that area, you know how it's impacting you.
Yes.
Whereas in another state, you've got to go and learn those rules. So I think states coming in
Yep.
actually decomplexes, well, that's not a word, but it actually brings a
demystifies.
level, I don't know if it's demystifies to a certain extent, but adds a layer of regulatory support that wasn't there before because your state's getting back in. We all have a Disability Act. There is the
Yep.
Queensland, it's still there,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So now what is the role of state government within that? So already you've talked about the fact that, they're creating this reference, they're doing all of these things. There's tools and mechanisms that state government has
Yep.
to access populations that federal doesn't.
Mm.
So I think unlocking those, I'm waiting to see what those opportunities are. As somebody who's worked in state government, right? State government federal government uses state government as a mechanism to access. In the same way, state government uses local government as a
Yeah.
mechanism
And,
to
and,
access.
and would that mean that the I guess state legislation will be incrementally be more like complex or more, I guess, more comprehensive to basically cover for the fact that they're going to have the I guess the control over the NDIS within the state or territories that they operate.
I don't know if it's necessarily becomes more complex. So you've got to look at just because a state government wasn't necessarily doing something doesn't mean the legislative power wasn't there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing like what I was saying with the NDIS and the enforcement, right?
Mhm.
So you've actually got to look at what responsibilities are the states and territories taking on. And that's in negotiations at the moment. The states haven't agreed to do a lot of
Mm.
things.
So,
Yeah.
Christine, what I was saying to that point, right, is yes, I see that there's going to be opportunities for providers,
Mhm.
but there's going to be challenges for providers as well.
Absolutely.
Like just even with the reforms and all of that, think about the cost associated
Mhm.
to for providers to get quality management systems,
Mhm.
to be more compliant, get more admin right
Mhm.
work. Now the states comes out as well, and states and territories, and they come up with the compliance side as well. Like
Mhm.
it adds on to
Yeah.
the
Oh, the
provide.
compliance cost is going to go up.
Yeah, you know, because it's
Yeah,
And
the
that's what I-
compliance consultant.
But I guess that's what I was leading to as well, because
I
you
think
know.
we need to also like it's really imperative for people in this sector, and especially if you're stepping into this industry, if you're a new provider or
Mhm.
thinking about it, to also putting in consideration the compliance cost of running an NDIS business right now at this point in time. You know,
It's
it's
very
it's
expensive.
manageable, it's expensive, but it's gonna go more expensive. It's gonna
Yeah.
get more expensive
That is true.
down the line. So it's something that we need to also flag in the evolution of NDIS or health system or human sector compliance journey. We're seeing a lot of things. I think is one of the things that will affect everyone. And for us, I'll just put a positive spin to this a little bit. It's not all doom and gloom. And uh, uh, one thing that I want to say that we're doing differently is leveraging the advantage of AI and technology
Mhm.
to help us actually keep on top of some of these things and extract even things like have flags with things like progress notes and all of that, because otherwise it affects the provider. I'm speaking from a provider's perspective. It
Obviously.
affects your overhead. You can actually keep up with a whole lot of regulatory requirements that's being shoved down through providers without proper consultation. Okay, proper consultation. And
Absolutely.
I don't want to talk about our peak bodies. That story for another day.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to call names. You all know yourself. We need to get better at really representing the body of providers. Also, one thing I'll say that is working for the whole industry from maybe the NDIS perspective is the adoption of technology and automation of AIs and all of that. I think I've seen that in financial integrity and accountability from NDIS. They should have done this since they did not have triggers and all of that can actually work out what is not possible. Before, people used to have errors like 500 hours a day or something. They didn't have like proper checks and all of that. They left it to the humans, to plan managers, or to the usual maybe NDIS back office guy that would just, oh, this is not correct. I think we're now getting into automation and data analytics and all of that is now helping curb out those bad eggs or some of those low hanging fruits. That's one of the things that I've seen that is changing and affecting the industry. And I think an early adoption of technology should be a no-brainer for providers, because it will help you flag things early and also just get a little bit ahead of the business costs or the costs associated with compliance. Because let's be factual here. Compliance comes with a cost. Comes with a huge cost. And people like Chris, the UC compliance, I think your job is going to be more relevant in the coming days. And I actually want to ask you, Christine, sorry to sidetrack.
Yeah.
Have you seen an uptake in unregistered providers coming to your doorstep, and what does that look like for you?
For me, so what I've seen an uptake, to be honest, is actually the market of registered providers is tiny, right? And so unregistered providers, yes, but it's more registered providers who've not used consultants previously coming more to talk to me, right? Because previously they were doing a lot of things on their own, and so a lot of what I've seen a huge increase is registered providers valuing consultants, not just when they've got an audit, but just actually understanding what an internal audit means, right? Doing training for their support workers, not just sending people out into the field without actually investing in that. So on the compliance perspective, yes, there's the regulatory, but there's also the humongous training obligation that is on providers. So one thing we haven't touched on, and Desire, I think you talked about it, and I think this goes to your question about unregistered providers, is the fact that when the industry is predicated on an unregulated basis, right? Support workers do not have mandatory minimum requirements to start working in the industry, right? They don't. You can wake up today and I can come and legitimately be hired by registered or unregistered providers, or I can hire myself.
Yes.
I can just put myself out there on a platform, on a Facebook page, and a vulnerable person can come and work with me. And if they've got an NDIS package that they're managing themselves, self-managed, they've got a plan manager, I can invoice them, they can pay me. That is legitimate.
Yes.
That happens, right? That is at the fundamental base of this industry. HK is not like that. DVA, a lot of other government-funded services are not like that. Those are well established. NDIS is still quite new. So in terms of, if you're talking about government space. So one, the unfairness of costs from an unregulated, because I know I've got unregistered providers who, up until last year, they were like, oh, okay, so do we really have to tell me when I really, really have to do this?
Yeah.
Because they've got thriving businesses without the regulatory framework. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean because you're an unregistered provider and I do want to myth bust, you're doing the wrong thing.
Yes.
No, I've got equally as many registered providers that are dodgy, if not dodgier, than unregistered providers, right?
Facts.
So I don't think it's the registration bit. I think it is the administrative burden on registered providers that is the unfairness. Right? And the lack, even though as an unregistered provider, you can volunteer to register for mandatory things like your NDIS work screen, all these things that you guys have to register for, right? Audits, which are humongous costs, right? Making sure that you've got policies and procedures that are up to date. You have to pay somebody to do that. Hiring compliance officers, and the list keeps going on. And an unregistered provider is sitting there like on their merry way, doing the absolute right thing, same as you, but they don't have that burden. They don't have that cost. They don't have to carry that, that overhead. And I think that has been the biggest gripe that I've heard from registered providers.
I ask the biggest question I ask is who is at the center of all of this? It's the participant.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the question I really ask. If the NDIS design is really focused on participants' well-being, safety, and person-centered support, why can't we have a basic benchmark where before you can be paid, even as a sole trader, you will have to have, a mandatory NDIS worker screening check? Do you know that sole providers, you don't need to have that?
Really?
You can, as sole providers. That's a big loophole.
Yeah.
As sole provider, you will be paid by a plan manager as long as you have an invoice and you have an ABN.
Wow.
So this is when you talk about compliance, these are some of the safety. Like I just look, I'm a very simple minded person, right?
Yeah.
Let's start with first principles. This is the aim of this, right? Who gets affected is this. Like, we need to actually go back to protecting the people that we actually made this scheme for. The participants. There's a lot of things that I see that is not fair on the participants to start with. Forget about providers now. The participant, like safety. There are things like we need to stop.
So with the yellow card. So remember before NDIS came in. So I just want to answer your question about. So before NDIS came in, remember we had blue and I'll talk about Queensland because we're in Queensland, right? We had blue and yellow cards, right?
Yes.
Yellow cards were if you worked with a person with a disability, and blue cards are working with children. Yellow card registration still exists under state government law. What Desire is talking about, right, is different. What Desire is talking about is the NDIS worker screening database that is managed by the NDIS,
yeah.
right? Because to get on that database, you have to have an employment number,
Yes.
and to get an employment number, you have to get that from the NDIS Commission itself. If you don't have an employment number, you can't obviously register people on the database. So two slightly different things. So to work with, so this is where state government comes back into the fold, right?
Yes.
State government always mandated that if you're going to work with children in Queensland, if you're going to work with a person with a disability, you have a blue and a yellow card. That is there. That is still there.
Yes.
So, and that's not a cost, because most of that, well, there is a small cost if you're operating as a commercial business, but a lot of those, if you're working as a volunteer, right, because that was there before, that's free. You can go and register for those things for free.
Yes.
And if you have, international students in your home, for example, like I used to have that, you need to have a yellow card. Even if that child then has a disability, I then had to have a yellow card, right? So some of these mechanisms are already there, but some of these mechanisms that are there, it's the enforceability and the checking on them, right? So somebody needs to enforce and check some of these things, right? And who's going to do that? I think this is where
That's
complexity
the gap.
there's a gap there. And then there is also the complexity of, okay, what is that minimum standard? So let's say, and this answers your question of how do we go to first principles? Let's put a grenade out there. Every support worker must have a certificate 3 in individual support. Can't work that, right? That more than halves the workforce, right?
Yep.
Because there's a payment associated with. So all of these, there's no perfect answer here is what I'm trying to say, right? So as a government person, and you can see I've got my bureaucrat hat on, you're kind of trying to balance these things that right? Because you needed to get, so when NDIS was set up, you needed to get the workforce up and running quickly, right?
That's true.
One of the things business asks for is less red tape, right? And some of the things you're asking for is more red tape. Right?
Yes.
So it's now trying to find what is that happy medium between having the right red tape that provides participants safeguards and all of those safeties, right? And what is the right red tape that allows business to grow and actually flourish and be profitable, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that balance is right.
And I guess what probably Desire was insinuating was is there's two groups of people, right? Obviously. You've got your registered and your unregistered. I guess the unfairness really comes from the fact that you as a registered provider, you just have so much to do. And where you're an unregistered provider, you pretty much have, there's nothing to report on, basically.
And John, can I tell you what inspired this thought process? It's I stumbled upon the NDIS banning list, right?
Yes.
The NDIS banning list. Can we go there? Banning list and
course we can.
enforcement order. Obviously, there are two categories of individuals that are there. There are the companies and, but majority of them was also sole traders.
Yes.
Sole traders, majority. And, it makes me, I began to think about it, right? If we can go back to first principles, what were the loopholes? And I'm not sure, I'm not saying that most of them didn't have NDIS worker screening check.
Yeah.
But there's no enforcement.
Yeah.
Or it's too late.
Or it's too late. Like to make you can wake up, John. You can wake up. You're a carpenter, right? I'm like, Mike, man. I heard, man. I'm just gonna take old mate there for a coffee, and I gotta be paid. I gotta submit me invoice and all of that, bro. You can literally become a support worker right now without any basic training, without any basic compliance and check. That's a loophole.
Yep.
You shouldn't, okay? If the state government is actually regulating, or if the state government and federal government are talking to themselves, you see, that's a big loophole. And you can just go there, take the guy out for coffee, not doing any capacity building support, just do, you guys are high-fiving yourself, listening to some rock music or whatever, and you can waste that 5 hours and come back and put your invoice and charge and just, exploit vulnerable people.
Yeah.
These are some of the things, like it's common sense, I don't want to, maybe it segue to, we can talk about the providers themselves in that list and all of that, and what we have to do. But this is, I looked at the list of banning orders and compliance enforcement and stuff. Majority of them are individuals, sole traders. And for me, the data speak for themselves. We need to actually now start looking at how can we better safeguard our participants and the industry. But yeah, obviously, I'm
And I
happy
think
for people
your
to.
average provider, and I say this all the time, your average provider is doing the right thing. You know, your average provider is unregistered sole trader is doing the right thing.
Yep.
So if you start looking at the enforcement actions, right, and you start looking at that list growing, the banning orders and all of that you're now seeing. Remember I talked to you about the agency growth, and remember I said to you, when an agency start out, it's a startup, remember? So the agency is also growing in its maturity in terms of its compliance functions, in terms of its enforcement, right? The first couple of years were just to get things going, right? Now things are going. Now we actually have providers, right? It's kind of like, you know, when any company starts, right? You can't have a regulatory system that's built to the hilt when there's no one to regulate, right? We now have an industry that is there to be regulated, right? And so you see that the regulation and the compliance is really now ramping up, right?
Yes.
And even though with the ramping up of all of that, right, it is not perfect by any stretch of any imagination, right? The cost, and I do want this acknowledged, the cost to registered providers is disproportionate in its impact when you look at the value proposition of being unregistered.
Yes.
Right? It is disproportionate, right? There is no value, right? Apart from the fact that you're either in a mandatory category that requires that for the NDIS to give you money because your money is coming as agency funded, right? That's the only way you can get your money. That is the sole benefit, right, of registration right at this minute, right?
Yep.
The unregistered providers can and do make a significant profit and do not have the additional compliance overheads that you have as a registered provider.
Yes.
Right?
I think it's definitely true as well. Like, you know, the NDIA, you know, they have increased the team significantly in compliance and enforcement as well. And what I find is that with unregistered providers, obviously, because you're not reporting anything in that sense. So
there isn't even the obligation to do self-assessments, even at a basic level.
So even if you increase your team of you know, of enforcement and things like that, you're still not going to be able to sort of, I guess, get them to be compliant, if that makes sense, right? So a lot of this, what's happening, especially the sole traders, is they're getting reported by someone, right? And at that point of time, it's way too late. So, you know, for me here is that there is a very big discrepancy or a gap here that we do need to address as a whole, is no matter what, like what you said as well, Desire, and I think that's where the tiered registration comes true. And what, you know, Bill Shorten has said as well is that if you're an individual sole trader, we need to at least know your name. We need to at least know details about you, right? If
100%.
we don't know anything about you, you know, it's like it's basically a free for all, and you know, and it's rampant at the moment, right? And because, you know, and we talk about the banning list, right? And we've got obviously sole traders, we've got providers on there as well, and you know, a worker can be banned, right? But if a participant self-managed, to be quite honest with you, the support worker could continue to work with him. You know, obviously, if he gets caught again, it would be obviously a serious matter.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, that's why I, you know, always say to participants, always look for, you know, who, especially if you're going for unregistered provider or unregistered worker, always go and look at the banning list. Look at some of the compliance actions that has been taken against them and see if that's something that actually, you know, a provider that you really trust, right? And I feel like, you know, that's something that the NDIS has actually, I guess, you know, done well. It's making certain things public information.
But the awareness is still not there from
correct.
You're right. Absolutely.
There's still, even a lot of people don't know about the banning list or enforcement actions and all of that. And look, my heart goes out to you know, people that go through that and you know, the NDIS, from my experience as well with the NDIS when it comes to compliance related stuff, the NDIS is really good with actually giving you education and giving you grace and actually helping you. They want you to be compliant. You know, you must do something.
It's a continuous improvement.
Yeah, it's a continuous improvement. I wish I can publicly shout out some NDIS staff that actually have you know, helped us get better as well as an organization. I really love them. Their mind is not actually there to ban you or to put out those enforcement orders, but you know, to get there, I'm not sure, you may have, you know, done a whole lot of crazy things or ignored a lot of safety warnings or things or compliance warnings. So I think it's good to put it out there that if you're listening to this podcast, if you're a new provider or whatever, the NDIS actually is there to help you. That department, I remember, even when we started newly as an organization, they did a lot of education around RPs, restrictive practices, and all of that, and they will give you a lot of grace. They will help you. You can actually request for them to come and train your people or do some and these things are free. You're not paying anyone. I think it's really important to, and they will help you get an understanding of your requirements and all of that. So, but if you get to that list, when people get to that list, it's actually a good thing for participants to actually always look at that list to know who's there and what to do and in choosing and choosing especially sole traders and maybe providers, so that you actually ensuring your own safety. Sometimes the onus is on us to do our own research. So it's really important for people to know what's out there.
But the question here, though, Desire, is, are plan managers monitoring that list? Because if we have unregistered providers or even sole traders, the payment needs to come from the plan manager.
The plan manager, even if they know, they don't have the enforcement powers. Yeah, they can't do anything, right? They don't. It's one thing to know, but it's also another thing to be, to have the enforcement powers. It's not. They don't have the legal backing to say.
The banning list is to do with registered providers. The banning list, in terms of
not just registered providers.
Yeah, but there's two things. So in terms of the enforcement powers of the NDIS, there's different levels, right?
Yes.
So as a registered provider, right, there's different, there's different spheres that you go through. So there's your registration being revoked completely. There's your registration being suspended.
Yep.
You can be in arbitration about it. And, a lot of these things have, time frames that can be put on there. And this is not only unique to NDIS, right?
Yes.
It's in every sector.
Yeah.
So in terms of
childcare.
So in terms of your question of when somebody is on, a banning order of some, so if you are in a plan manager's position, right?
Yep.
Where you are actually an officer of the government.
Yep.
If you think about it, if you think about where the plan manager's money comes from, right?
Yep.
And you are distributing agency money, government money, there's a fiduciary responsibility on you to go through certain checks and balances, right?
Yes.
So with plan managers, they do have that obligation to go and check before they do pay that invoice. The question that you're saying is whether they do or not. And what is the consequences if they don't? There are consequences in the sense that the NDIA itself can actually block plan managers from actually having the ability to make payments, right? Okay. So there are consequences to these things, right? And there are enforcement powers, right? But again, with a lot of these things, enforcement costs money. You've got to have the manpower. You've got to have the resources.
Yes.
There is a prioritization. Where is the focus on it, right? So it's not that these things don't exist. They do exist. But it's the level to which they can be enforced or have been being enforced that I think is where I get a sense of a lot of the frustration is coming from. Because if I read a piece of paper here, right, there's a whole lot of information on this piece of paper, right? There's things on here that I should be doing, that I should be knowing. Then there is the capacity issue, right? And I think when the capacity and the ability of the enforcement agency is in line with the rate at which people are rorting certain systems, right? Then you get that perfect compliance, right? But there's no system that's like that, right? If you look at any criminal justice system or anything like that, the rates of the enforcers and the people that are circumventing, it's always, these guys always seem to be one step ahead sometimes of the enforcement. So I think there is a level of maturity that needs to happen in the compliance space. And I think Desire, like, for example, you're very knowledgeable in terms of what the NDIS provides. There also needs to be take away the fear of going to government, right? I do not know for the life of me why providers do not ring the NDIS Commission, the NDIA, and ask questions directly themselves. They
Let's
just
start
don't.
with them
I-
fixing their phones.
Fixing their phones, yes. So then there's the fixing their phones.
Yeah.
Then there's the frustration of I've rung them, Christine, 2,000 times.
Yep.
Either they don't know what they're talking about, and some of them don't.
Yes.
Yes,
To be
You're
honest.
right.
Because I've had providers who've had 5 or 6 different answers.
Yes.
We had a litany of emails come from the commission at one
Yeah.
point about conditional audits, right? It was on a Friday, and auditors and all of us, our phones rang off the hook. It's not conditional audits were not new, by the way. They were always there. And it was like,
Yeah.
well, this is not actually a new thing. You were always asking people to do that. But you know what happened on a Friday? Somebody hit send, and this letter went to everybody because they
Oh.
were never enforcing it,
Yeah.
right? They were waiting for you to get your 18-month audit, right? So it was written in the letter. Nobody ever took any notice of it.
Yep.
Then all of a sudden, I had people ringing me off the hook. This is new. I'm like, this is not new. A conditional audit is not new.
Yeah.
It's always been it's always there.
Yeah.
But then they send this barrage out because guess what? They've now got the army
The
to
army,
be able
yeah,
to be
the foot
Yeah.
doing
soldiers.
that.
And, and it's funny you mentioned that, right? I looked at that list, right? A lot, unfortunately, a lot of providers are being deregistered
Mhm.
for
For not
not
doing
making
an
their
audit.
obligation of 18 months audit. And
Mm.
it's actually a very big thing. Like, I was surprised to see the number of NDIS is not cracking down on. And if you're a provider waiting to get your ducks in a row to do your 18 months audit, your
Do it.
midterm audit,
Yes.
don't even think about it. Do it. They're deregistering people in drones. I think it's really important to note. I saw that list. I was like, man, it
Mhm.
sounded a bit brutal. To just deregister someone, that means it's night. You're no longer part of the
No, there's
NDIS.
always no, and that's the thing. People also need to not be afraid to go and talk to government, right?
Yeah.
Even if
Yeah.
you become insolvent as a business, right? Let's talk
Mm.
about different area. You can still go back and trade. There's how many business owners do you know who go insolvent on one business and go back and
Yeah.
trade in another, right?
Yep.
It's understanding what that revocation means. It's then contacting the NDIS and say, okay, you've revoked it. In order for it to be reinstated, in order for this, what do I need to do? There is a process,
That's
right?
good.
And so I think you get into trouble when you don't ask. It's like debt collectors, right?
Correct.
You don't, your debt goes up with interest because you're not talking to them.
Yes.
If you go and talk to them and you put a payment plan in place, things happen.
Yes.
I need to
That's
repair
really
my credit
important.
report. How do you repair your credit report? Well, get a credit report, get a document, talk to your bank and say to them, okay, I haven't met the lending criteria. You've said no to me. How do I do that? So it's
Yes.
the same in
It's
NDIS.
really good. Like, it's really good to hear this, Christine, because when I was looking at that list, I was like, oh, shucks, this is a lot. Like, it's very serious. And I don't know. Like, the reality is this: a lot of businesses are not making profit as well,
Yeah.
and the cost of compliance and cost of audit is also high. You
Mm.
know, sometimes it might be a simple thing as, oh, we only have one participant, and we don't have the financial
Mhm.
we
And they've
don't have
let
the
it
profit.
lapse because
don't-
it's too expensive.
Yeah, it's too
Yeah.
expensive to get into it. So I wonder if the NDIS can, actually also take some of these things into consideration, or if they do, or if they don't. But it's good to know that you can still talk to them and
You
that
can
they're
always
You know
talk
what?
to
they're being
any-
lenient too. Because
you can
I
talk
feel
to-
I feel for providers like sometimes it's not easy. Business
Yeah.
is not easy.
I'm not sure if it's similar experience with you. So,
Mhm.
since we've been operating, I've always consulted with the department. So
Mhm.
obviously the State Department. I've
Mm.
always consulted with the Commission,
Yeah.
especially when it comes down to, positive behavior support, restrictive
Yes.
practices and so on and so forth. Very, very helpful. Reportable incident, very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Now, recently though, I do have to say this is my observation, obviously. I don't know whether you feel the same way, Desire, but
Okay.
I'd say maybe about less than 12 months ago,
Mhm.
I'd say. What I've started to observe is that whenever I ask for help nowadays,
Mm.
it does feel like they're coming in as a enforcer, right? They're not there to help. They're there to say that you're doing something wrong.
Question.
And it's quite disappointing because, there's a lot of times where I'm questioning them based on my interpretation of, what their guidelines are of, or what certain things are. And they just tell me as a matter of fact, this is what it is. You need to go do it. Right. And I'm like, well,
And that's actually not fair, because then it just makes a lot of providers shut off, because
Yeah.
you'll be like, you just do your thing, as opposed to, because you're asking questions to get clarity, because there's a lot
Exactly.
of gray areas in this in the NDIS sector.
Yep.
and you're asking questions to get clarity. If they're coming down to just say, putting you on that, it will cause a fear factor.
Exactly.
That will make you not like, what's the point of asking? I might as well do my thing. When I get found out, I get found out. I think it's not a good way. But my own personal experience, John, to answer your question, I've had I haven't done this in a while, and I've got team members who do this, but the times I've consulted NDIS, especially, I'm trying to remember the department that looks after restrictive practices and all of that, and the compliance reportable incident. They have been really, really great.
Yep.
I'm actually so almost tempted to just drop some names.
Department of Families, Child Safety and Disability Services.
There's some
Yeah.
key individuals that we have on our speed dial now because of how
same thing.
amazing
I do have the same ones.
that they've been, and I really want to take this time to applaud those people and also encourage, because it's not, NDIS is doing great. Like, there's a whole lot of learnings where it's evolving. It's a new piece. There's there's also a lot of maturity that needs to kick in. Some people don't even know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But let's applaud the ones that know what they're doing, that have been helping providers.
Yeah.
I think that department, NDIS, one thing I can tell you that they've gotten right is having the right people in those departments. They know what and they're ready to work. They're hungry.
Yeah.
Like, whenever you ask them questions like, oh, does anchored care need a refresher course? Do you want to just call all of your care coordinators? Let's do this. And I'm like,
They're
wow,
great.
this is amazing. And after they're sending
Yeah.
resources and all of that, they're amazing. And I really want to shout them out. But the problem is now, there's a lot of providers that don't even know these people exist. So NDIS needs to get better with education and awareness within the apps that are there to help providers. I'm happy they have the liaison officers. Personal experience, not so great. They don't have powers. They're just there to
they're liaison.
The liaison. What I understand about liaison is, you need to be the bridge between this person and this.
Yeah.
And what it means is that you need to be able to give feedback the other way around as well. Take some of the learnings and give back. And when you've expected that, it's just been a black hole. Maybe they're getting better. I know they're new, but that's one of the things that I'd want to point out here. There's room for improvement. It's a young organization. We're all evolving together. But look, NDIS has done great in that aspect.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think your point about the training that the department, the point I always say to people when they call me, have you actually called the department? They can actually provide a lot of this for you.
Okay.
Because one of the things that we've talked about is the massive overhead, right? In terms of cost and the massive training. Take advantage of the free training and information that's offered, not just by the NDIS Commission, by the NDIA agency, by the State Department, right? Take advantage of that, especially around restrictive practices. There is a lot of, these departments have developed these resources. There are people that are trained in the department to do this. There are people whose jobs it is to do this.
Yep.
Now, can they always come to you proactively? They can if they know you.
Yep.
If you've contacted them and you've followed up with them, right? But that's not their job. Their job is to respond to you when you get into contact with them. So the onus is on providers to basically, all providers need to just start being more proactive about asking, right? And take away this fear factor, right? The government is there to serve. The government is there to ensure that they want you to be successful, right?
Yep.
But on your point about the slight switch from continuous improvement, we're friends, let's hold our hands, whatever.
Yep.
We have been friends for a while, we've been holding hands for a while. There's also, I think, a fairness in expecting that the level of, understanding of fundamentals 101 should be a little bit more raised with the market, right?
Yes.
And I think, and I say this to people who are going through like recertification. So when I'm going through recertification with my clients, I'm asking them more mature questions, right? When we're doing the train, than I was asking you at provisional stage, right? It's the same with when you're starting out at kindergarten, right? The questions you're now going to get asked in high school are quite different. So if you've been in the market for like 2 or 3 years, right? You can't expect that your auditor and even the department's going to be responding to your one-on-one questions in the same way. There has to be a level of growth. So we have to allow those, and there has to be a level of, the industry itself doing more information sessions like this. So I'm really grateful and really thankful that you're raising awareness and you're having conversations, because think about how we learn now, right?
Yes.
The cost of education has collapsed. We don't need to go to institutions, right, to learn. More providers just put up a Facebook video on what you learned. Like, encourage the market to start creating all of these, resources in and of themselves. What does that do for you as a business? It raises your credibility. It raises your profile. Give back to the community that is giving to you, and all of you as providers are here giving back. This is time you could be in the field doing whatever you're doing, but you're here raising awareness, creating educational resources, support. The industry needs to start finding solutions for itself within itself, because I tell you, waiting for government to do it, you'll be waiting a long time, because government's busy. Like, they've got heaps of stuff to do, and they need to only be dealing with the ambulances at the bottom of the cliff. Because really, if you think about it, if you want government to do more, your tax goes up, right? There's also those catch-22 situations, right? So at budget time, the minister's saying, okay, the market's crying for this, the market's crying for that. And then they're like, well, to do that, it costs this, right? And then that means less money coming to participants, less money coming to you as providers. So how do we find that kind of happy middle ground? And this tension won't go away between
Can I tell you how we can find that good happy ground? And before I go to the last question I have, is there are some low-hanging fruit that the NDIS has, right? I think they already have the resources, right? They need to do well with mass media and education on what they have. I'm not even saying reinvent the wheel. What, like, NDIS is like a lucky dip right now. Yeah, it's some secret squirrel business. Right?
Secret squirrel business.
I'm just telling you, like, it's like some people have that knowledge. Oh, I know who to go to because you've been in the sector long. It needs to be a place where there's a proper library or repository of, this is where to find this. Make it easy. Their website is a maze, right? There's a whole lot of things like, and I want to see, I'm not asking the NDIS to reinvent the wheel. I'm asking, make what you have more accessible for providers. And also, let's have benefit of being a registered provider. Right now, if you ask me, there's no much benefit apart from, like you said, being able to claim money as an NDI, NDI registered participant, right? We need to get a library of some of these trainings. What comes to you as a registered provider? Now we have a library of trainings, right? This is a repository. You have training on RP. You have all of this sent to you, and a constant reminder that you are now part of an ecosystem. To use that word, ecosystem of this. This is who is available for you if you're struggling. Like, that needs to be well defined. Let people want to actually register. Right now, there's a lot of reasons. People are like, why do I want to register? There's no incentive to go out there and get registered. The benefits, it's good, but the benefit is not really pronounced. So let it be more pronounced. Let them advertise some of these guys. They can help you. People want help, but they don't know where to get help. There are low-hanging fruits that the NDIS can do actually and get better. And there should be some whistleblower protection, or even make it easy for there to be whistleblowers, and so that it will actually drive up the safety of our participants. There's some practical low-hanging fruits that the NDIS can actually do to improve things. Like, they have the manpower now, they have the resources, and the liaison officers. I've gone to a few events, and I'll give a shameless plug to Redlands Disability Network. That you have these liaison officers that come. They're really great at telling you this is what's to come. This is we should have more of that in all of the networking events. Like, it feels like you have to go, it's a bit of hit and miss. You have to go to a few of these things to get information. Every week, especially in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, where we play, you don't have a lot of NDIS liaison officers giving you information as to what's coming. They need to be more present, and I get it. There are not a lot of them. Even if it's a video, like a 5 second of 15 minutes video. Here's what's to come. Here's what, like, there are things that we can do to improve the quality of NDIS. Now, the last question I wanted to ask Christine, because we've talked about a lot of compliance and all of these things, right? For an unregistered provider looking to get registered, right? What is the process like, and what is it to expect in terms of costs? Like, I really want to.
So if you're an unregistered provider and you are considering registration, the cost can vary depending on whether you've got participants or not, right? So if you're coming in for a provisional registration, you're coming in for document check, that cost it can be quite low. Now, the problem is the auditing costs. There's a huge range in terms of what auditors charge.
Can you give us a ballpark figure?
So ballpark figure, you're looking at, it can be as low as, with some auditors 2.5, and it can go all the way up to 5.
2.5?
Yep.
I've never seen that audit.
You've never seen that
neither.
audit?
Me neither.
When you're not in provisional audit.
Well, doing that provisional audit, I think we paid, the least was $5 grand.
Yeah.
But auditors' fees have come down. They really have. But then again, auditors' fees are also going up in the space where you've got participants, right? So we're seeing a lot of trends on an upward trajectory, right? So really what I do encourage you to do is do your research, right? Get 3 or 4 quotes from out there and go back and bargain with, your auditors and say, hey, listen, these costs are costing us. In terms of consultancy fees, what companies like myself charge, look, there's completely different models out there, right? There's the companies that I say give you bits of paper, right? Where you download, a policy and procedure, and you go, it's like your DIY kit, right? You get your starting point, you go, and the cost of that has come right down, right?
Yes.
So originally, you had, if you look at, your Provider Plus, your Varnas, your HCPs, they've kind of been, the forerunners in those spaces.
Yep.
Even their policies have come down, right?
Yep.
Then there is the actual time that you have with the clients. So the actual consultation, the actual audit coaching, there's not a lot of that, right? And that's a lot of what I do. And that's what I'm passionate about. As far as I'm concerned, bits of papers, we can download them off the internet. Like I can, right now, you can do a Google download. You can go to ChatGPT, you can go to Perplex. You can start and get a basic set of fairly decent policies, right, on your own, right? You can do that, right? Interpretation of those policies, understanding how they relate to your business, understanding how you can modify them and make them work to the NDIS practice standards, completely different kettle of fish. That requires you actually physically doing work, right? And we've noticed now the NDIS is no longer, especially if you're in your recertification stage, accepting generic templates that come from consultants. They're just not. Auditors are asking you a lot of questions. Have you read them? Have you understood them? And do these actually reflect what I'm seeing going on in your organization, right? So as an unregistered provider, right, firstly, do you have even a set of basic policies? A lot of people who come to me don't, right? And they've been running around thinking a service agreement is all that they need to have, right? Everybody, I've got a service agreement. Okay, how did you get to that service agreement? Do you even have a support plan at the very least, So I think in terms of cost, it is wide ranging. It can be, but cheap, if you go too cheap, because a lot of people sometimes don't use services that are slightly more expensive. If you go cheap, you get a cheap service, right? You get what you pay for.
Yes.
Because a lot of the times I've got clients who have come to me, I've given them a quote for services and they've gone away and said, oh no, can't afford you. No problem. I mean, it's a free market, right? They've paid double because they've gone away, they've got the bits of paper, but they haven't got the support. So what I'm finding is then it ends up costing you twice as much. Sure. So I'm not saying you necessarily have to use me. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is when you go and you talk to a consultant, please make sure you understand what you actually are getting from them. Are you getting the training and the knowledge?
Yep.
Are you actually growing? Are they actually interested in your business, or are they interested in the next product that they can sell you? So ask some questions of whoever it is that you choose. And there's a lot of us out there, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of us offering services in different ways, but make sure you're getting value for money and you're not just paying the cheapest dollar, because it will come to bite you. And one of my clients always says to me, ignorance of the law can be very costly. Ignorance is very expensive, and it can cost you more than the $500 that you saved
True.
than going with somebody who would actually sit down with you and make sure that you've actually understood.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, one last question I have. Bill Shotton basically putting auditors in the spotlight, right? Calling basically auditors doing a box ticking exercise.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, look, there's some auditors that definitely do
Yep.
box ticking exercises, but a lot of the auditors I work with are really passionate about their jobs.
Yep.
A lot of them have lived experience
Yep.
in terms of, they've either got a child, they've
Mm.
worked in the disability sector, so they are as passionate as providers,
Yep.
right? So I guess it's the same as in the NDIS provider space, same in any space, right? It's easy to say, oh, it's tick boxing for them, right? But auditors, at least the ones that I've worked with, there's a mixture of those that do their job really, really well
Yes.
and those that don't, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's the same with, I guess, the conversation we were having earlier on about fraudulent providers and providers doing the right thing. Your average auditor really takes their job seriously, right? Your average auditor, at least that I've had to deal with, is going through the practice, is asking the questions, is really explaining and asking, do you understand this? And there's obviously a thin line between them being an auditor and them actually doing consultancy, which they can't do.
Yeah.
So I have found, I think it's a little bit unfair to say that, because they're under a lot of pressure. And there's also not always the level of clarity and certainty around what is being looked for. So, for example, do you actually understand the difference between what your auditor is going to audit you at midterm, conditional audit, at recertification? Or does it all actually just look the same?
The same.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I've had this conversation with auditors, and for them it's really hard to discern that, because the things that they feel they're being held to are the same,
Yes.
and then the business cost is the same. So I don't wholeheartedly agree with that.
Okay. Well, thank you for your answer. That was a great answer. That will be the end of the podcast today. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Desire, for coming
Thank you for your
today.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
inviting me.